Okay, greetings. We will be talking about this week DuBois' Souls of Black Folk, and also we will be discussing Joe Fagan's Racist America. All right, so with that being said, we will first start with W.E.B. Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk. Du Bois, by all accounts, is the father of sociology. He is the first to study race from a sociological perspective. He is the first, not necessarily to study it looking at history, which was actually what he got his Ph.D. in from Harvard, but he was the first to scientifically apply the scientific method to the study of race, particularly within an American context. He absolutely pioneered many of our research methods, including triangulation of data, mixed methods approaches. He literally did thousands of interviews on foot in the late 19th century. So there weren't a lot of, there was nobody, not even a lot, there was nobody, no sociologist, no researcher who was doing the things that Du Bois was doing at this time. And even before him. And so I think it is important for us to study Du Bois and to recognize Du Bois as not only the father of sociology, but the father of race studies, because this is a racial and ethnic minorities class. And we're starting with the foundation. We're starting with some of the foundational elements of understanding and studying race. I don't think that it's possible, in my opinion, to have a race class and not delve into Du Bois and not delve into at least some of his earlier thoughts, his earlier theories and concepts, because this is how we begin to have and understand our more contemporary discussions around race. And so it's extremely important that we engage Du Bois and we engage his writings and we engage his ideas, and then even expand those ideas to include other social locations, to include other ideas around race, even to include other racial groups and ethnicities. I think Du Bois would appreciate that. At the time, the basic racial discussion or conversation centered around what we call the Black-white binary, which, you know, the United States was largely made up, when you're talking about race, of Black and white people, right? It wasn't, there wasn't as many people of other racial groups to really consider when we're talking about more dynamic ideas around race, right? Except for, like, obviously Native Americans and Native people of the United States. A lot of them were killed off. A lot of them were isolated to colder parts of the United States. However, they also are a part of the race conversation as well at this time. But generally speaking, when there were policies that were created, when there were traditions around race that were established, generally it was within the concept of the Black and white discussion, tension, conversation, relationship or perceived relationship, tense relationship. And so that is where Du Bois comes in. So we're going to talk about Du Bois, and we're going to talk about his first piece called Souls of Black Folk. Before we get into Souls of Black Folk, I want to talk a little bit about who Du Bois was. And so W.E.B. Du Bois, his full name was William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. Some people say DuBois, but that's not how you pronounce it. You do pronounce it Du Bois. He was born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And I believe, was it 1865, 1868, something like that. It was in the 1860s. I want to say it was during slavery, but he himself was not enslaved. He was born of a mixed race heritage. He was born free, and he was raised in a pretty well-to-do, for a Black kid, in the 1860s. It was okay, right? He wasn't enslaved. He wasn't in poverty, but obviously he did not live like his white counterparts. But showed extreme intelligence, acute intellect at a very early age. After that, he would go on to through elementary school, through middle school. He would even talk about in his bio how his first kind of understanding around race came when he was in school and he was at a dance and he wanted to dance with this little girl that he had a crush on. She was white and she would not dance with him. And it was because he was Black and she could not engage with him in a, romantically or show that she liked him because he was Black. And so that was kind of the first time that he realized that his skin color was a hindrance or would be a hindrance in his life. In addition to that, obviously, he dealt with other racial and racist incidents, which led him, when he did graduate from high school and he had the opportunity to go to college, he decided to go to an historically Black college. Also, he wasn't allowed, many colleges did not allow Black students in at that time. So he went to Fisk University in Tennessee, and that is where he really gained a certain level of confidence and understanding of who he was and where he came from. And so, Fisk University, he got his bachelor's degree there. And then later on, he would enroll at Harvard University, where he would become the first African-American to graduate from Harvard University with a Ph.D. He would also go to a university overseas, and that is where in Germany he began to engage with folks like Karl Marx. He began to engage with the workings of Max Weber and many of the people that we talked about in the last lecture. He began to engage with them and begin to understand this new budding discipline known as sociology, right? So then he would take these ideas back to the States and he would apply them after graduating, and he would mix history and his understanding of history with sociology to begin to test and assess race. And what he found when he went over and he studied under and studied with Marx and studied Weber and became friends with Weber, is that he realized that there was all these conversations around class, but there was no conversation around how race and how racism contributes to class inequality. He will go on to expound on this notion of the proletarianization of a race, in which he says that essentially within the US context, there is an entire race that is forced to be the proletariat, that is forced to be the working class. And this is done through the politicization of race. This is done through the creation of race as a social construct. And so this is essentially what DuBois kind of uses and then expounds on throughout his career. So it's argued that he was the first person to really take the notion of race and bring it into the academic conversation in a way that was so blatant, forcing folks like Max Weber and others to consider race when they are coming up with their solutions to the larger social problems and the issues around the human condition. When DuBois comes back, he does his dissertation on Black folks in Farmville, Virginia. Then he takes what he learns from that study, and then he goes on to complete a study called the Philadelphia Negro. He does this study through, I believe it was the University of Pennsylvania. And this was after he could not get a job anywhere. After he graduated from Harvard, no white institutions would hire him. So he started working at a Black institution in Ohio. He would later on get funding to do this piece studying race and class in Philadelphia. And the reason why was because at that time, Philadelphia had one of, if not the largest group and most dynamic group of Black folks in the United States, right? And when I say dynamic, it's just, there's a variety of Black folks. So you have poor urban Black folks, you have working class Black folks, middle class Black folks, then you got a few Black people that got some money, right? So he was able to explore and understand the even larger complexities around race, urban life, racism, all of these different concepts, class, social class, mobility, gender. And when he did this study, that was mixed methods and did all these interviews and triangulation of data, statistical analysis. I mean, it was definitely by far the most complicated sociological study done at that time. He then used that and came up with these ideas, right, and these concepts around race and what it was that people of color, particularly Black people, were dealing with during this time. And then he took those ideas, he wrote them in his conclusion in the Philadelphia Negro, and then he took those and expounded on them with a series of essays that's called The Souls of Black Folk. And The Souls of Black Folk is by far one of the most important books of the 20th century. Reason why, one of the quotes out of Souls of Black Folk is that the 20th century is the main social problem of the 20th century would be the problem of the color line. And we see that going throughout the 20th century, that the issue of race and the issue of color will be an ongoing one. So he kind of foresaw that, and that philosophical statement definitely reigned true throughout the 20th century. Whether you're talking about Black people, whether you're talking about our Jewish brothers and sisters, whether you're talking about the Brown Power movement, the Chicano movements of the 1960s and 70s, various racial movements that make up the significant elements of the 20th century. So after that, Du Bois would then get a job at Atlanta University, where he wouldn't start the sociology program, but he would help expand the sociology program by putting his hands on major studies that were coming out during that time and training the next generation of sociologists. So he would do that at Atlanta University, making Atlanta University the home, essentially, of sociology, as well as some people will call the University of Chicago the home of sociology as well. So making both of those cities and those universities very important in establishing the role of sociology in American life and in American higher education. Then later, he would move to Harlem, where he would be very much involved with the Harlem Renaissance. Some of you may be familiar with the Harlem Renaissance. And this was just a rebirth of Black folks. This is where you get the popularization of jazz. This is where you get a lot of your famous poems, poetry, artwork, music, style, from the story of the Harlem Renaissance. And so Du Bois played a huge role in being a voice of the Harlem Renaissance and a leader of the Harlem Renaissance. And then after that, Du Bois would continue doing research. He would continue to write. He would continue to fight for the rights of Black folks and the rights of people throughout the rest of his life. He would talk about voting rights, politics. He was absolutely considered a world-class leader, at that time being considered a Negro leader, a world-class leader for racial equality and equal rights and human rights. Over time, Du Bois would eventually subscribe to communism, and then later he would get tired of fighting because he started to realize and he felt that there was really no point, and that the way in which the United States functioned was the way it was going to always function. And he didn't feel that there was a need to try to create a more harmonious, racially harmonious nation within the United States. He eventually would move to Ghana, and he would stay in Ghana until he would pass away. I believe he passed away the year that Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And so that is the story of W.E.B. Du Bois. And so I think that is important, again, just to give kind of a backdrop of who he was, and to show his significance not only to sociology, but to our understanding of race as a whole, regardless of if you're coming from a psychological point of view, historical, et cetera. Du Bois can be found in all areas of academic life. And so, with that being said, what I want to focus on today, two pieces. One is a piece he wrote called Souls of Black Folk, a collection of essays on race. And then another one is this one called Dark Water. And in Dark Water is where you will find the souls of white folk. That is where you will find souls of white folk. So what I decided to do was to just give you just a chapter, but in this book called Dark Water, you will see a chapter. It's in chapter 2, where you will see a piece called Souls of White Folk. So we're going to talk about those two pieces, and then after that, you know, you can take a break or you can watch it. Well, we'll talk about that in this video, and then in the next video, I will talk about Fagan's Racist America. So that is that. All right, so going to the second slide. The first thing that Du Bois asked in Souls of Black Folk is, how does it feel to be the problem? He says, this is the real question. How does it feel to be the problem? And it's interesting because he's talking to Black people, African Americans, but a majority of African Americans probably can afford to buy this book and may not be able to read and understand the language that he's talking about. They can understand the concepts, but many of them don't have a middle school education, right? At the very least, a high school graduation, and he's, you know, using Harvard academic language. So is he really talking to Black people? Sort of, but not really. He's really talking to white people about Black people and relaying the messages and the realities of Black folk to white people, right? Because essentially the argument during this time that white people are making, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, is why is it that Black people have not caught up in terms of competition in education, in employment, in wealth building? Why have they not caught up to white people? Why is it taking them so long? Yes, we can understand because of slavery, why there would be those barriers, but Souls of Black Folk was published in 1903. Slavery was abolished, sort of, in 1865. So it's been a couple decades now. What's taking y'all so long, right? A lot of these ideas around race and the reason why, particularly African Americans, were held to a substandard conditions, and they were essentially people who would be considered ignorant or uneducated or not prepared to do things for themselves and on their own. And it was because of their own personal, personal setbacks, their own individual, I guess their individual ignorance, their individual laziness. They consider the issue of race a trouble, not an issue. And we talked about that last in one of the previous videos. And so it was Du Bois who's now questioning this. Okay, well, let's ask them, how does it feel to be a problem? If they are the ones that are considered to be problems in our society, let's see where the problem really lies. So he asked them, how does it feel to be the problem? And then he says, and the question that they're asking themselves, and they're asking God, Why did God make me an outcast? Why am I a stranger in my own house? What do you think that question means coming from African Americans, coming from Black people in the early 20th century? Why did God make me an outcast, a stranger in my own house? I want you to take some time and think about that. You can pause the video here. And then coming back, one can say that maybe African Americans, Black people are feeling like, many of us have been here since the creation of this country. Many of our grandfathers and grandmothers contributed to, or maybe even fought or participated in some way in the Revolutionary War since the birth of this country, and absolutely the Civil War. So we've been here. In fact, this country was built on our backs. The White House, we built. These big universities in the South, we built. These highways were built and are still being built by us, by people that look like us. If you look at the chain gangs, if you look at the history, there's a Slavery by Another Name, the documentary. Later on, we're going to read the new Jim Crow. Slave labor, prison labor, which is very much racialized, is used to build the highways, to build prisons, to build roads, to create and maintain the infrastructure of the United States. So Black folks at this time are saying, but we don't even feel like we belong. When we see the flag doesn't feel like us. I know it's supposed to, but it doesn't mean the same thing to us that it does to you. We feel like strangers in a house that we build. God, why am I an outcast? Why am I the one that's cast away? Why am I the one who the laws don't apply to? And so these are the questions that DuBois is saying Black folks are asking themselves and are asking God after he's done this very extensive study. I think it was like a 2-year study in Philadelphia. And one of the things he finds is this notion that Black folks have what is called a veil. And he talks about it on page 38, a veil, which he says they have this perspective that the world yields him no true self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. What does that mean to you? And when we look at it, we see that this notion of a veil means that, according to DuBois in his studies, Black people at that time, he's feeling like don't really have an understanding of who they are, because the way in which they interact with white folks, the way in which they interact with each other is always based on the way that white folks see them. They have not had time to develop a true self-consciousness because they're coming out of slavery where they were property or they were treated like property, and they have yet to shed their ideas, their minds, their identity from that. They're working on that. But it's difficult to do when they are in chains. And then it's difficult to do when the physical chains are off, but the socio-political chains are still on. They still can't go to the same schools. They still can't vote. They still can't marry whoever they would like to marry. They still can't build wealth. They still don't have the same access to jobs. They still don't get paid the same. So many barriers that are keeping them in chains. So because of that, they cannot necessarily see themselves in a way that works for them. They cannot build up their own true identity because they always have to think about, what does white America, what do white folks see when they see me, and how do I navigate that? Because that I have to do out of survival. To create my own identity is a privilege. The fact that white people in the United States and US citizens have been able to take certain ideas, culture, music, language, self, and create a self. An American identity is a privilege. But if you are always in survival mode, you don't always have that privilege of creating your own identity. So this is what DuBois argues, right? And to bring it closer to home, one way to think about it is using this scenario. If it's raining outside, and you have to walk somewhere. So you decide that you want to get something to cover your head. Some people, if you don't have an umbrella, you may go in your closet and you may find a hoodie. You may take that hoodie and you'll put the hoodie on, and then you'll go outside and you'll walk. If you're a white person, you might do that. If you're a woman, you might do that. And probably won't give it a second thought, because the only thing you're thinking about is, I need to cover my head so that I don't get wet. But if you're a Black male, you may go and get that hoodie, and then the first thing you think about is, wait a minute, where do I have to go? Am I going somewhere where I'm going to see people that don't look like me? When it stops raining, am I still going to have to wear, do I still wear this hoodie, or can I take it off? Because if I wear this hoodie, but I wear it on the wrong side of town, or I wear it around people that don't look like me, if I wear it around some white people, they might think something else. I may have to be careful if I wear this hoodie. Now, he may still choose to wear it, or he may not wear it, depending on his choice, but you can almost guarantee that there's something that crossed his mind. Wherein if you are a person of another racial group, maybe not. That is what DuBois would call the veil. The fact that one group doesn't have to think about the way in which society sees them, but another group does. And they have to use that perspective to navigate and survive life. Because the decisions that they make using their veil can sometimes be the difference between life and death, depending on how the other world perceives them. And so using that and going along with that idea, we move towards what we call double consciousness. And double consciousness is what DuBois is largely known for. Typically, if you hear people bring up DuBois, especially in mainstream discourse, they usually bring up his notion of double consciousness. And double consciousness is said to be this way where, or the certain perspective in which people live. They are always looking at themselves through the eyes of other people. They're measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. And so his argument after doing this research is that all Black people have this double consciousness. They always see themselves, and then they see themselves through the eyes of other people. And the outside world, particularly the white world, looks on them in amusement. They're entertained by them. But then they also look at them in contempt. They feel sorry for them. Or, well, no, that's the pity part. But the contempt is they look at them as second-class citizens. They look at them as ignorant, stupid, only able to reach a certain level. People that have to be taken care of, infantile, if you will. Right? Look down on them. But in the pity, you also have a lot of white people who feel sorry. Wow, I'm glad I wasn't born Negro. I'm glad I don't have to deal with the things that they have to deal with. Not out of, can I help? But just, these are very backwards people, which is actually this notion of being a backwards people is something that DuBois deals with, well, Alden Morris talks about DuBois dealing with in his book, The Scholar Denied. And I think we read that later. I'm not sure if we read that later, but yes. So These are the ideas that white people have about Black people, especially during this time. And then Du Bois is saying this is how many of them are looking at themselves, because this is the way that other people look at them, while also trying to formulate their own identity. And so this is the double consciousness that they have. Then he goes on to say that Black folks in America have these two identities that are constantly going back and forth with each other because they're American and a Negro. These are two very different cultures at times. Because to be American is to be proud of the country, is to be proud of the flag, is to be proud of the anthem, is to be proud of the heritage and democracy and freedom and justice. But then to be Negro is to say these things, but then also realize my particular relationship with the country or my particular history does not fall in line with everything that's being said within the American identity, within the American history books. So you are American, but you are a Negro. You are American, but the way in which people view America, life, is not necessarily consistent with your reality. So these two are always clashing with each other, to be American and to be a Negro. He says these are two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings. They're striving to create harmony within one, what he says, one dark body. And the dogged strength of Black people alone is the only thing that keeps them from literally going crazy. Their own strength, their own culture that they're creating, their faith, their push, their struggle for humanity is the only thing that keeps them from going crazy. Because these two identities are always going back and forth with each other. Now we might call this maybe code switching. You may have heard the term code switching. This is kind of an example of double consciousness. You go into one place and you have to put on a certain demeanor, dress a certain way, use a certain language, behave in a certain way that may make people comfortable, and then you go into another space and then you may act differently. And this can be related to race, but now in present day life, you can even apply it to class. If you come from a poor working class background, but then you're able to achieve mobility and you have money and you have resources, but then you have friends from your old background, your old neighborhood, your old school, and you want to relate to them, but then you also have friends in your new life of, middle class or upper middle class or whatever, and you want to relate to them. So there is this two-ness. It can also be a gender thing. Women have to constantly think about themselves and then also the way in which men will look at them. If you identify as a male, there's probably never been a time where you looked in your closet and you decided not to wear something because you didn't know if you would be sexually harassed or mistreated based on what you were wearing in terms of being grabbed or being called out of your name for a sexual reason. But I can guarantee you every person who identifies as a woman that is looking at this has absolutely had to do that. I can't wear that skirt because I'm going here and I don't want to send off the wrong message. I can't wear that blouse. People may think it's too revealing. So that's a certain idea or, example of a double consciousness outside of race. So what Du Bois did when he was creating this analysis is he starts this conversation, and then later on we can even apply this again to other social locations. And then there could even be almost this triple consciousness. When I was writing my dissertation. I interviewed a guy who was Black and he was gay. And he talked about going into the barbershop and how much he loved the barbershop. And he enjoyed the barbershop because it was the place where Black men, there's this business happening, there's this kind of economic system going on in the barbershop, right? But then in addition to that, the conversations, the lightheartedness, the language, the actions, the people, the love you get from being a Black man in a Black barbershop. But then he also talks about how he would hear terms that were demeaning to the LGBTQ community. He would hear these terms and he would feel disconnected from this place that he loved. He would have to sometimes quiet himself because maybe he didn't want to out himself to these people, but they're using language that are derogatory to his sexuality. And so these are the things, there's almost this triple consciousness. There's race here, there's gender here, and there's sexuality here. So as we begin to develop and grow and our identities become more dynamic, we start to expand what DuBois started in terms of this discussion around double consciousness. Now, as you read further into this chapter, you see that, you can go to the next slide, DuBois also talks about this search for freedom. Search for freedom on pages 40 and 41. So what he's saying is that Black folks aren't just sitting back and saying, woe is me, we're trying to get free, people are holding us back. No, there is this constant move and this search towards liberation, freedom, equality, justice, peace, happiness. There is this pursuit of happiness. And there's all these different avenues to which they have looked and tried to gain this pursuit of happiness, to gain this freedom that they believe is available in this country. The first thing they tried to do was vote. DuBois says they believe that voting would be the key to equality because it was taught in the 19th century. It was believed if you could vote, then you could put somebody in office that can represent your interests and help to ensure that you can have policies and laws put in place that will protect you. And that was the thing that was said to be the element of the United States that made this country unique. Other countries, whether they were African countries, European countries, et cetera, Asian countries, did not have this democracy element, did not have this representative government. Granted, that wasn't new. Historically, there were other groups and other governments that had this, but at that time, this is what's kind of being said, that the United States was the first one to use this or to bring up this idea and apply it on a mass scale. So when Black folks became free, the first thing they did was, we got to try to vote so that we can put people in office, even if they are white, that are going to protect our interests. They're going to want our votes. So we're going to tell them, hey, make sure we have equal this, make sure we have right to education. Make sure we can start our businesses and our businesses be protected from vigilantes, the white vigilantes, the Ku Klux Klan, et cetera. Make sure that we're protected. They tried it, but eventually voting rights were eradicated for Black men and never existed for Black women until 1965. And white women until 1919. And Black men at first, and then they got taken away, and then they wouldn't get those back until 1965. So after that, Black folks said, okay, well, we can't vote. but education. If we can get smart, if we can go to their schools, and you know what? We don't even have to go to their schools. We'll build our own schools. And then show them that we know how to contribute to the society. We know how to be innovative. We can invent. We can think. We can create. We can contribute to politics. We can contribute to the economic growth of this country. We can be a part. We're smart enough to do this if given a chance. And we won't even ask to go to your schools. We just want the same education and we can do this. And they tried that. And there were a lot of educated people. DuBois, Booker T. I mean, we can go down the line, Carter G. Woodson, plenty. But still, freedom was not found for a majority or all of Black people. And so Du Bois goes on to say towards the end, to be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in a land of dollars is the bottom of hardships. What do you think he meant by that? To be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in a land of dollars is the bottom of hardships. Think about that. So the idea, I think, when he says that is to say, sure, you have countries that are poor. You can be an individual in a poor country and you're poor, and that's understandable. But if you're poor in a place where everybody is rich, something's wrong with that. See, here Du Bois, decades before C. Wright Mills did, is already talking about troubles and issues. If I'm poor in a poor country, that is a, well, I guess that's a larger issue, but that's an issue that one can understand. Because everybody's struggling. But if you're poor, but all these other people are rich, or at the very least living way better than you are individually, that's a problem. Especially if you're a poor race. Notice he says to be a poor man is hard, but if your entire race is poor, but the country in which they live in has money galore, riches galore, resources galore, that's an issue. A poor man, trouble. A poor race, issue. And so what he says to his colleagues who are blaming Black folks for their second-class citizenship, he's saying, you have asked these people who have been handicapped to race with the world. But you have not given them the time and the thought to be able to deal with their own social problems. These are the problems that you created for them. So you created these problems, you gave it to them, and then you're saying, now catch up to white people. What's taking you so long? When you have not completely freed them from these chains to begin with. Yes, physically, but not culturally, not socially, not politically, not educationally, not financially, not religiously. And so until you can do that, it is unfair for you to ask these people to race with not only white folks, but the rest of the world. And wonder why they continue to be in this similar position that they've been in for the past few decades. So what I would like for you to watch is I would like for you to watch this video, The Unequal Opportunity of Race. It's a really good video. I would like for you to watch it. And then I would like for you to go to the next slide. And I want you to think about these questions. This is your class assignment. What did you take away from watching this video? And what messages did you receive? Do you agree with the ideas the video was putting forth? How did white women play a role in this race? What systemic racist issues did you see in the video that still exist today? I hope you've enjoyed this lecture. If you have any questions, email me, come into my office hours, inbox me. All right, I will talk with you later. Have a great week, great weekend, and see you soon.